Subscribe to Storylab. Now let's begin this one. The deployment brief sat unfinished on Keith Larson's laptop when his phone buzzed. Not the usual buzz, a video call from Sean. Keith glanced at the timestamp. 2:47 a.m. Kabul time, which made it late afternoon back in Montana. His son knew better than to call during operational hours unless something was wrong. The screen loaded, and Keith's blood turned to ice. Sean's face was swollen beyond recognition. His left eye had disappeared into purple-black flesh. Blood matted his sandy hair, and more dripped from a gash above his eyebrow that clearly needed stitches. But it was the way his son held his head, tilted at an unnatural angle, moving with careful, fragile precision, that made Keith's jaw clench. "Dad." Sean's voice came out thick, slurred. Don't freak out." Keith was already standing, his chair scraping across the plywood floor of the operations tent. Around him, 3 other Delta operators looked up from their own preparations. Mark Castaneda caught Keith's expression and immediately killed the music playing from a portable speaker. What happened? Keith kept his voice level through years of training, but his free hand had already curled into a fist. It was Pat's friends, the Savage Kings. Sean winced as he shifted position. They showed up at the house when Mom was at work. Said they heard I'd been telling people at school that my dad was some kind of war hero. Said spec op guys are just government janitors who clean up other people's messes. Keith said nothing. He'd learned in interrogation training that silence extracted more truth than questions. Pat was there. He didn't stop them, Dad. He just watched. "Sean's good, I found the camera." And Keith saw something in his son's gaze that he'd never seen before. Not just fear, but a bone-deep understanding that the world was more dangerous than he believed. Howard Pearson had a baseball bat. Aluminum. He said, "Your daddy might think he's tough, but out here, we own 5 states. We're the law." The tent had gone completely silent. Joshua Hanna and Benjamin Lacey had moved closer, their faces hardening as they listened. Stephen Kane pulled out his phone, already recording. He hit me with it. Right here. Sean's fingers hovered over his left temple, trembling. I heard something crack inside my head. Then Kenneth Dodson, he's their sergeant-at-arms or something, he kicked me in the ribs while I was down. Said if I told anyone, they'd come back and finish the job. Said my mom's safety depended on me keeping my mouth shut. Keith's voice came out flat, empty of emotion. "Where are you now?" "Janelle's house." Aunt Janelle, Amber's younger sister, the only member of his ex-wife's family who'd maintained contact after the divorce. She found me walking on Highway 93. Took me to the ER in Kalispell. They did a CT scan. And skull fracture. Hairline, they said, but it's there. 3 broken ribs. Concussion. Sean's composure cracked. "Dad, I'm scared." Pat came home while Janelle was bringing me here. He told Mom that I started a fight with some kids at school. Mom believed him. She said I'm grounded for a month, and I need to stop making up stories about you to impress people. Keith closed his eyes for a moment. Amber. Beautiful, practical Amber McKinney who'd given him an ultimatum 5 years ago. The teams or his family. He'd chosen the teams, convinced he was serving something greater. She'd remarried within 18 months. To Pat Caldwell, a man who owned 3 motorcycle repair shops across Montana and rode with the Savage Kings MC. "Listen to me carefully," Keith said. "Stay at Janelle's. Don't go home. I'm filing for emergency custody, and I'm coming to get you. Dad, you're in Afghanistan. Your deployment doesn't end for another 3 months. My son's in the hospital with a fractured skull. That changes things." Keith looked up and found Mark Castaneda watching him with the cold calculation of a man who'd spent 12 years eliminating high-value targets. Mark gave a single nod. "Sean, I need you to send me that video you just took of your injuries. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there any chance this was actually a fight with other kids?" "No." Sean's voice steadied. "It was Pat's guys. All of them over 40. They surrounded me in our driveway. Janelle has security footage. The camera she installed last year after someone broke into her car. She gave me a copy. Sent me everything. Every video. Every photo. Every piece of evidence." Keith paused. "And Sean, you did the right thing calling me. Those men made a mistake today. A very serious mistake. After Sean disconnected, Keith stood motionless for a long moment. Then he turned to find not just his immediate team watching him, but 6 other operators who'd filtered into the tent. Word traveled fast in a Delta squadron. "I need to show someone something," Keith said. "All of you come with me." They walked through the late afternoon heat to the command center, a reinforced structure that housed their squadron's leadership. Inside, Lieutenant Colonel Ian McFadden was reviewing drone footage with 2 intelligence analysts. McFadden had the kind of face that belonged on Mount Rushmore. All hard angles and weathered certainty. He'd been with Delta for 16 years, had personally eliminated over 400 targets, and was known throughout JSOC as a man who protected his people with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to combat. "Sir," Keith said, "I need 3 minutes of your time. It's personal, but it's important." McFadden looked up, registered the crowd of operators behind Keith, and dismissed the analysts with a gesture. "Show me." Keith played the video. All of it. Sean's battered face, his halting explanation, the clinical recitation of his injuries. The tent was silent except for his son's voice and the distant thump of a helicopter landing. When it finished, McFadden sat back in his chair. His jaw worked for a moment. Then he stood, walked to the tent's entrance, and looked out at the compound where 62 Delta operators were currently stationed. "How many of them are there?" McFadden asked. "The Savage Kings?" "Intelligence suggests about 40 full members across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. Another 100 associates and prospects." Keith had already done the research during the walkover. They run meth, guns, and protection rackets. The FBI has an open investigation, but it's been stalled for 3 years. Local law enforcement won't touch them. Of course they won't. McFadden turned back to face the room. His eyes swept across each operator present. "Gentlemen, I'm about to abuse my authority in a way that could end my career. Anyone who wants to walk out right now, do it. No judgment. No consequences." Nobody moved. "Keith, you're going home. Emergency leave, effective immediately. I'll have the paperwork filed within the hour." McFadden's voice dropped to something cold and precise. "As for the rest of you, our squadron has a 2-week R&R rotation scheduled to begin in 72 hours. I'm moving that up. We're all going stateside, and we're all going to Montana." Mark Castaneda spoke up. "Sir, with respect, we can't engage American citizens on American soil. Even shitheads like these. We're not going to engage them, Sergeant Major. We're going to visit our brother's family. Show our support. Maybe do some camping in the beautiful Montana wilderness." McFadden smiled, and it was the same smile Keith had seen right before the colonel cleared a house full of Taliban commanders. If these Savage Kings happen to encounter 62 Tier 1 operators who are on vacation and decide that perhaps they've made some poor life choices, well, that's just good fortune for everyone involved. Benjamin Lacey, the team's communications specialist, raised a hand. "I know a guy at NSA. He owes me for Kandahar. I can have full SIGINT coverage of every Savage Kings member by tomorrow morning. Phones, computers, everything." "Do it," McFadden said. "Joshua, I want you to contact our friends at FBI Behavioral Analysis. I want a complete psychological profile of their leadership. Stephen, reach out to ATF. This MC has to have federal warrants we can leverage. And someone give me everything on their finances, how they move money, where it goes, who handles it." Keith found his voice. "Sir, I can't ask you all to." "You're not asking, Keith. I'm telling." McFadden moved closer, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of every mission they'd run together, every brother they'd lost, every sacrifice they'd made. 5 years ago, your son was 7 years old. You missed his birthday because we were in Yemen hunting that Al-Qaeda cell. Remember what you told me when I offered to send you home?" Keith remembered. "I said the mission came first. Always. And it did. You stayed, we completed the mission, and 8 American hostages went home to their families because of it." McFadden's hand landed on Keith's shoulder. "You've put this squadron ahead of your personal life for 12 years. You've bled for us, killed for us, and nearly died for us. Now your son, your child, has been attacked by criminals who think they're untouchable, who think that because they ride motorcycles and wear leather vests, they're somehow dangerous. The colonel looked around the room at the assembled operators. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to show these weekend warriors what real danger looks like. We're going to teach them the difference between playing outlaw and facing men who've spent a decade hunting actual monsters. And we're going to do it in a way that's legal, controlled, and absolutely terrifying for them. How? Keith asked. By being ghosts. By making them paranoid. By demonstrating that every phone call is monitored, every movement is tracked, and every threat they've ever made has been documented. McFadden's smile widened. These idiots run a criminal organization. They have to have vulnerabilities. We're going to find every single one, and then we're going to dismantle their entire world piece by piece. Not with guns, with information, pressure, and the sudden understanding that they've declared war on people who end wars for a living. Stephen Kane pulled up a map of Montana on a tablet. The Savage King's main clubhouse is outside Kalispell. That's where Pat Caldwell operates from. They've got secondary locations in Missoula, Billings, and Bozeman. If we want to coordinate this properly, we will. McFadden cut him off. 72 hours, gentlemen. Pack everything. And I mean everything. We're going to Montana, and we're going to remind some people why they should be grateful that men like us exist. Keith felt something unlock in his chest. Not rage, though that was there, burning cold and patient. This was something else. Purpose. Direction. For 12 years, he channeled violence into service, had become a precision instrument for his country. Now, for the first time, that instrument would be used for something personal. And God help anyone who stood in his way. The flight from Kabul to Kalispell took 36 hours with connections through Germany and Chicago. Keith spent most of it reviewing the intelligence package that Benjamin Lacey had compiled with terrifying efficiency. The Savage Kings Motorcycle Club had been founded in 1987 by 3 Vietnam veterans who'd grown disillusioned with civilian life. What started as a riding club had metastasized into a regional criminal syndicate. They controlled meth distribution across 5 states, ran illegal firearms through a network of sympathetic gun shows, and operated protection rackets targeting small businesses. The FBI had tried to infiltrate them twice. Both undercover agents have been identified and beaten badly enough to require extended hospitalization. Pat Caldwell had joined the club in 2003, 2 years before he'd met Amber. He'd risen through the ranks through a combination of business acumen. His motorcycle shops provided legitimate income and money laundering infrastructure, and a willingness to use violence. The Montana State Police suspected him in 3 unsolved homicides, but witnesses had a habit of recanting testimony. The current leadership consisted of Caldwell as president, Howard Pearson as vice president, Kenneth Dodson as sergeant-at-arms, and Lee Hatfield as treasurer. All 4 men had criminal records: assault, weapons charges, drug possession. All 4 had evaded serious prison time through a combination of expensive lawyers and intimidated witnesses. Keith memorized every face, every known associate, every pattern of movement. By the time he landed in Kalispell, he could have drawn their organizational chart from memory. Janelle Weber met him at the airport. She was 32, 12 years younger than Amber, with the same dark hair, but harder edge to her features. She hugged Keith carefully, as if he might break. "He's at my place," she said as they walked to her car. "The swelling's gone down some, but Keith, it's bad. The doctor said another inch to the right, and that bat would have killed him." "I know." Keith threw his bag in the back seat. "How's Amber taking it?" Janelle's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "She doesn't know the truth. Pat convinced her that Sean started a fight at school and is making up stories. My sister's not stupid, but she wants to believe him. She's invested so much in making this marriage work. Even after he let his friends fracture our son's skull, she doesn't believe that happened." Janelle pulled out of the parking lot, her jaw set. "I showed her my security footage. Clear as day, 5 grown men surrounding a teenager in your old driveway. Howard Pearson with a baseball bat. You could see Sean go down, see them kicking him. Pat's right there in the frame, watching. And she said that the footage was doctored, that I've always hated Pat, and I'm trying to break up her marriage." Janelle's voice cracked. "She's my sister. I love her. But right now, I want to shake her until her teeth rattle." They drove in silence for a while. Kalispell rolled past the windows, a town of 30,000 nestled in the Rocky Mountains, all pickup trucks and craft breweries and outdoor gear shops. Beautiful country, Keith thought. Wasted on ugly people. There's something else you should know, Janelle said. Pat knows you're coming. He told Amber that if you try to take Sean, he'll have the sheriff arrest you for parental kidnapping. Everett Perry, the county sheriff, he's in Pat's pocket, has been for years. I'm not planning to kidnap my own son. I filed for emergency custody before I left Kabul. A judge in Flathead County granted it this morning based on the medical evidence. Janelle glanced at him. Pat won't care about a court order. Neither will Perry. Then they'll learn to care. Keith watched the mountains rise in the distance. I'm not alone in this, Janelle. I have friends coming. A lot of friends. How many? Enough. Sean was asleep on Janelle's couch when they arrived, his face still a patchwork of bruises that had faded from black to purple to sickly yellow-green. He'd lost weight. Keith could see it in the hollowness of his cheeks, the way his t-shirt hung loose on his frame. The medical report had mentioned difficulty eating due to jaw pain. Keith sat in the chair across from the couch and just watched his son breathe. 17 years old, a senior in high school. He played baseball, pitcher with a fastball that had college scouts interested. He wanted to study engineering. He'd never been in serious trouble, never given Keith reason to worry. And now someone had taken a bat to his skull because they didn't like his father's profession. Sean's eyes opened. For a moment, he looked confused, disoriented. Then recognition dawned, and relief flooded his battered features. Dad. Keith moved to the couch, gathered his son as carefully as he could, and held him. Sean shook against him, not crying exactly, but something close to it. I've got you, Keith said. Nobody's going to hurt you again. Pat told Mom he'll kill you if you try to take me. He said he has connections in the Afghan theater, that he could have you fragged during a mission. Keith pulled back enough to meet Sean's eyes. Pat Caldwell is a mid-level criminal who runs motorcycle shops and sells meth to truckers. He doesn't have connections in the Afghan theater. He has delusions and a leather vest. Those aren't the same thing. He seemed really confident, Dad. So did Saddam Hussein. Confidence without capability is just noise. Keith checked his watch. In 12 hours, the first wave of Delta operators would begin arriving at various locations around Kalispell. Here's what's going to happen. You're coming with me. We have a court order granting me emergency custody. If Sheriff Perry wants to interfere with that, he can explain it to a federal judge. Where are we going? A rental house on Flathead Lake. Secluded, defensible, beautiful views. Keith had mentioned that Mark Castaneda had selected it specifically because it had good sight lines, limited access points, and was far enough from town that nosy neighbors wouldn't be an issue. You're going to rest, heal, and finish your schoolwork remotely. I'm going to handle Pat and his friends. Ow! Keith smiled, and it was his father's smile, the one that had scared childhood bullies into finding easier targets. By reminding them that there are levels to this game, and they've been playing in the kiddie pool their entire lives. The Savage Kings held church every Thursday night at their clubhouse, a converted warehouse outside Kalispell, surrounded by chain-link fence and security cameras. Church was sacred. Attendance was mandatory for full members, and the decisions made there governed the club's criminal enterprise. Pat Caldwell called the meeting to order at 8 p.m. sharp, looking around the table at his leadership. Howard Pearson, Kenneth Dodson, Lee Hatfield, and Elmer Schwartz, their road captain. 37 full members filled the room beyond them, drinking beer and talking shit. First order of business, Pat said. Keith Larson is in town. He picked up his kid this afternoon. Howard Pearson snorted. So what? We already sent the message. Kid knows to keep his mouth shut. The problem is Larson filed for emergency custody. Got a judge in Flathead County to grant it based on Sean's injuries. Pat lit a cigarette, taking his time, which means he had evidence. Medical records, probably that security footage from Janelle's camera. Kenneth Dodson cracked his knuckles. Want me to pay Janelle a visit? Convince her that cameras malfunction sometimes. No. Pat blew smoke toward the ceiling. That'd just confirm we have something to hide. Besides, Larson's not going to do anything. He's military. All rules and regulations. He'll file reports, maybe try to get the FBI involved, but we've danced with the feds before. They can't touch us. Lee Hatfield, who handled the club's finances and was smarter than he looked, spoke up carefully. Pat, no disrespect, but Larson's not regular military. I did some checking. He's Delta Force. That's spec ops. Those guys don't file reports. They kick down doors and shoot people. In Afghanistan, yeah. Not in Montana. Pat stubbed out his cigarette. Look, I know you're all nervous because we put hands on his kid. But think about it. What's he going to do? Start a war in the middle of Montana? He's one guy. We're 40 deep with another 100 associates. If he wants to play tough, we'll remind him that this is our territory. The burner phone on the table buzzed. Pat frowned. Nobody should have that number except his most trusted contacts. He picked it up, found a text message from an unknown number, and opened it. The text contained a single photo, Pat's living room, taken from outside his house. High resolution, recent. He could see the TV playing SportsCenter, could see Amber's purse on the coffee table. And superimposed over the image in red text, "You have poor operational security." The fuck? Pat showed the phone to Howard. Before Howard could respond, phones started buzzing all around the room. Kenneth's, Lee's, Elmer's. Every phone in the clubhouse all at once. They all contained photos. Kenneth got a picture of his truck in his driveway with a message. "Your alarm system has 17 vulnerabilities." Lee received a photo of himself at an ATM earlier that day. "Your financial transactions are insecure." Howard showed him at a gas station. "Your movements are predictable." The room went silent. Pat felt something cold settle in his stomach. Not fear exactly, but the first whisper of it. His burner buzzed again. Another text. "There are 62 of us, and we know where all of you sleep. Consider your next moves very carefully. KL." Pat stood up fast enough that his chair scraped across the concrete floor. "Everybody shut down your phones. Now, someone's fucking with us. It's Larson." Lee's voice had gone tight. "Has to be. He's trying to spook us." "Then he's doing a good job," muttered someone from the back of the room. Pat's mind raced. 62 people? That couldn't be right. Larson was one operator, maybe with a few buddies from his unit. This was psychological warfare, trying to make them think they were outnumbered. "Listen up," Pat said, raising his voice. "This is intimidation bullshit. They took some photos, sent some texts. So what? They're trying to make us panic, trying to make us do something stupid. We don't react. We maintain operational discipline. We keep doing business as usual." Howard leaned close. "What if it's not bullshit? What if he really did bring his whole unit? Then we contact Jerome Russell, get our legal strategy tight, and we wait them out. Larson's on leave. He has to go back to Afghanistan eventually. When he does, this all goes away." But even as Pat said it, doubt gnawed at him. The photos had been too good, too precise. Taken from positions that suggested professional surveillance. And the timing, every phone in the clubhouse going off simultaneously, that took coordination. Maybe, Pat thought, they'd underestimated Keith Larson. Maybe they'd made a very serious mistake. Keith stood on the deck of the lake house, watching the sun set over Flathead Lake's dark water. Behind him, through the windows, Sean was doing homework at the kitchen table under Janelle's supervision. The kid was healing, physically at least. The psychological damage would take longer. His phone vibrated. "Mark Castaneda, Phase 1 complete. All packages delivered. They know we're here." Keith had expected fear. Maybe some retaliation. What he got instead was silence. The Savage Kings had gone dark after the text message barrage, pulling back to their clubhouse and hunkering down. Smart in a way. They were trying to wait him out. That wasn't going to work. "Keith." Ian McFadden's voice came from the driveway. The colonel had arrived 2 hours ago in a rental SUV, dressed in civilian clothes that somehow made him look more dangerous than his uniform ever had. "We need to talk strategy." They walked down to the dock, where they could speak without being overheard. The night was cool, and Keith could smell pine and clean water. Benjamin cracked their communications. McFadden said without preamble, "These idiots use burner phones, but they're all on the same provider, and they reuse phone numbers. We have full access to their network, calls, texts, everything." What are they saying? A lot of tough talk about how they're not scared. Pat's telling everyone to maintain discipline, act normal. But there's fractures forming. Some of the younger members want to know what they're up against. A few are suggesting they back off, apologize, make this go away. And Pat, doubling down. He's convinced this is just you trying to intimidate them, that you'll get bored and leave. McFadden pulled out a tablet, brought up surveillance photos. Joshua's been doing reconnaissance. The Savage Kings have 4 primary revenue streams: meth distribution, gun running, protection rackets, and money laundering through Caldwell's motorcycle shops. The weakest link is the money. Keith studied the photos. Explain. Lee Hatfield handles their finances, but he's sloppy. Routes money through shell companies that are easy to trace if you know what you're looking for. Our friends at FinCEN have been tracking some of these accounts for months, but haven't had enough evidence to freeze them. Until now, we can give them evidence. Better, we can make the Savage Kings think their own people are stealing from them. McFadden's smile was wolfish. Organized crime groups are paranoid by nature. They're held together by violence and mutual benefit. Undermine the benefit, make them think someone's skimming, and the violence turns inward. Keith considered this. It was elegant. No direct confrontation, no legal exposure. Just information warfare that would tear the club apart from the inside. What do you need from me? Permission to get creative. Some of what we're planning isn't strictly legal, such as hacking their financial accounts and moving money around to make it look like embezzlement. Planting evidence that suggests Lee Hatfield is cooperating with federal investigators. Maybe arranging for a few members to get pulled over with drugs or guns in their vehicles, substances and weapons they definitely didn't put there themselves. Keith thought about his son's fractured skull, about Amber refusing to believe the truth because it was inconvenient, about Pat Caldwell watching while his friends beat a teenager with a baseball bat. Do it, he said. All of it. Make them destroy themselves. There's one more thing. McFadden's voice dropped. Sheriff Perry. He's dirty. We've confirmed he's been on the Savage King's payroll for at least 3 years. He's also the one who'd arrest you if Pat claims you're violating custody orders or harassing them. We need to neutralize him. Ow! The FBI's Public Corruption Unit has been building a case against Perry for 18 months. They have wire recordings, financial records, the whole package. They've been waiting for the right moment to move. McFadden pulled up another document on his tablet. I spoke with the assistant director this afternoon, explained our situation. He's willing to accelerate their timeline and arrest Perry within the next 48 hours, but only if we can provide additional evidence that locks down the case. What kind of evidence? Perry meeting with Savage King's leadership, accepting payment, discussing criminal activity. McFadden met Keith's eyes. We need to orchestrate that meeting, record it, and hand it to the FBI on a silver platter. Keith thought about it. Risky, but not impossible. You have a plan? Always. But it requires bait. Someone Perry trusts. Someone who can arrange a meeting with Pat without raising suspicion. Understanding dawned. You want me to use Amber? Not directly. But if word got back to Pat that you're planning something, that you're gathering evidence, maybe preparing a lawsuit, he'd want to meet with Perry to coordinate their response. We make sure that meeting happens somewhere we control. We record everything. And then we gift wrap it for the FBI. Keith looked out at the dark water. Using his ex-wife, even indirectly, felt wrong. But then again, Amber had made her choice. She'd chosen to believe Pat over their son. She'd enabled this situation by refusing to see what was right in front of her. Set up, Keith said. But Amber doesn't get hurt in the crossfire. Whatever happens, she stays safe. Understood. McFadden stood. One more thing. The rest of the squadron arrives tomorrow. All 62 operators, just like I promised. We're going to establish a perimeter around this area and make sure the Savage Kings understand exactly what they're dealing with. They'll call it an invasion. Good. Let them. The more scared they are, the more mistakes they'll make. And Keith, McFadden's hand landed on his shoulder. This ends with your son safe and those bikers destroyed. I gave him my word. Delta doesn't break its word. After McFadden left, Keith sat on the dock for another hour, watching the stars emerge. Tomorrow, the game would escalate. Tomorrow, the Savage Kings would learn what it meant to threaten a Delta operator's family. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. And unlike their weekend warrior bullshit, this would be a war they couldn't win. The next morning, Kalispell woke up to find itself occupied. Not obviously. There were no military vehicles, no uniforms, no overt displays of force. But suddenly there were fit, watchful men everywhere. At the coffee shop downtown, in the hiking trails around Flathead Lake, parked outside the Savage Kings clubhouse in nondescript rental cars, standing in the hardware store, buying camping supplies. 62 Delta operators dispersed throughout the valley like smoke. Pat Caldwell first noticed them at 7 a.m. when he stopped at the gas station and found 3 men filling up vehicles with out-of-state plates. They didn't look military, dressed in jeans and flannel shirts, talking about fishing, but something in the way they moved, the way they stayed aware of their surroundings, screamed professional. By noon, reports were flooding in from Savage Kings members across the valley. Lee Hatfield counted 8 unfamiliar faces at the grocery store, all buying supplies in quantities that suggested they were settling in for an extended stay. Kenneth Dodson reported finding 2 men hiking near his house, polite, friendly, but clearly conducting surveillance. Howard Pearson's girlfriend said strange vehicles had been parked outside their apartment all morning. Pat called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. 20 members showed up within the hour, all agitated. They're everywhere, Lee said. I counted at least 15 different guys just in Kalispell. How many did Larson bring? He said 62 in that text. Pat tried to sound confident, but that's probably an exaggeration. Maybe he's got a dozen buddies. They're just moving around to look like more. Or maybe he really did bring his whole unit, Howard said. Pat, these aren't weekend warriors. I saw 3 of them at the Range Rider restaurant. Ex-military for sure. Probably spec ops like Larson. They looked at us like we were targets. Elmer Schwartz spoke up from the back of the room. I say we hit them first. Find out where they're staying, show up in force, make it clear this is our territory. And then what? Kenneth asked. These are federal operators. You want to start a shooting war with Delta Force in the middle of Montana? That's suicide. So what do? Just let them run us out of our own town. Pat held up his hands. Everyone calm down. We're not running, and we're not shooting. We're going to be smart about this. These guys can't stay forever. They have deployments, missions, other obligations. We wait them out, maintain our business operations, and we don't give them any excuse to escalate. His phone rang. The burner. Pat answered, and Sheriff Everett Perry's voice came through, tense and angry. Pat, what the hell is going on? I've got the FBI in my office asking about you. Pat's stomach dropped. What? 2 agents from the Public Corruption Unit. They're asking about our relationship, about payments I've allegedly received from the Savage Kings. They have financial records, Pat. They know about the accounts. Don't tell them anything. Lawyer up right now. Too late for that. They're not arresting me yet, but they're making it very clear that I'm under investigation, which means I can't help you anymore. I can't protect the club. I can't run interference. Nothing. I'm radioactive. Pat closed his eyes. This was coordinated. The operators showing up, the FBI investigation accelerating. Larson had brought resources they couldn't match. Everett, listen to me. Did they mention Keith Larson? No, but they did say their investigation got a boost from new evidence. Fresh surveillance, financial records, recordings. Pat, someone's been watching us. Probably for months. After Perry hung up, Pat looked around the room at his brothers. Good men, most of them. Veterans of smaller wars, bar fights, drug deals, the occasional turf dispute. They'd built something here, a kingdom of chrome and leather and violent certainty. And now that kingdom was under siege by people who ended actual kingdoms for a living. Change of plans, Pat said. We need to go on the offensive. Legal offensive. Jerome Russell is still our lawyer, right? We get him to file harassment charges against Larson, restraining orders, whatever legal tools we have. We make Larson's life hell through the courts. Lee looked skeptical. You think that'll work? It'll slow him down. Buy us time to figure out our next move. Pat stood, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. And we keep our heads. These operators can surveil us, intimidate us. But at the end of the day, we haven't broken any laws they can prove. As long as we stay clean, stay smart, we're untouchable. But even as he said it, Pat felt the ground shifting beneath him. The club had survived FBI investigations, rival gangs, internal power struggles. But they'd never faced anything like this. They'd never faced men who hunted terrorists for breakfast. Jerome Russell's law office occupied a converted Victorian house in downtown Kalispell. He was 63, silver-haired, and had built a lucrative practice defending criminals who could afford his rates. The Savage Kings were good clients, predictable income, loyalty, and a willingness to pay premium prices for premium protection. When Pat and Howard showed up Thursday afternoon, Russell welcomed them into his office with practiced warmth. "Gentlemen, I heard you've been having some excitement." That's one word for it. Pat laid out the situation. Keith Larson, the custody battle, the operators flooding into town, the FBI investigation of Sheriff Perry. Russell listened, taking notes on a legal pad, his expression unreadable. When Pat finished, the lawyer sat back and steepled his fingers. "Your instinct to come here was correct. However, I need to be very clear with you about our options and our limitations. Talk to me." First, the good news. Keith Larson assaulting you or engaging in vigilante justice would give us significant legal ammunition. But from what you've described, he hasn't actually done anything illegal. Having his military friends visit Montana isn't a crime. Conducting surveillance in public spaces isn't a crime. If they stay on public property and don't make threats, there's nothing I can charge them with. What about harassment? Howard asked. Difficult to prove unless they're making direct contact or explicit threats. Sending anonymous text messages, if we could even prove it was them, might qualify, but that's a misdemeanor at best. Not enough to get them removed from the area. Pat felt frustration building. So we just have to sit here while they destroy our business. How exactly are they destroying your business? Russell's eyes sharpened. Be specific. Pat hesitated. He couldn't admit that the Savage King's criminal enterprises were suffering because their people were too paranoid to operate. They're intimidating our members. People are afraid to leave their houses. Again, unless they're making direct threats, that's not actionable. Russell leaned forward. Pat, I need you to understand something. Keith Larson's son was hospitalized with a skull fracture. There's medical documentation, witness testimony, and security footage. If this goes to court, and it might, you're going to lose. The judge will grant Larson full custody, and there's a real possibility that criminal charges get filed against whoever was involved in that assault. It was just a fight between kids. The security footage suggests otherwise. I've seen it. Russell's tone turned cold. Which brings me to my next point. I can defend you if we stick to legal strategies. But if you or your club members do anything else to that boy, anything at all, I withdraw as your counsel immediately. I will not be party to violence against children. Howard bristled. We're not planning to. I don't care what you're planning. I'm telling you what my boundaries are. Russell closed his notebook. Here's my advice. Back off completely. Don't contact Keith Larson. Don't go near his son. Don't engage with any of these military men. Let the custody situation resolve itself through the courts. Focus on your legitimate business operations and hope the FBI investigation goes nowhere. That's it. Pat couldn't believe it. We just surrender? You already lost, Pat. You lost the moment you let your friends hospitalize a 17-year-old kid. Now you're choosing between bad options and worse options. The bad option is strategic retreat. The worse option is escalating against people who are significantly better at violence than you are. After they left Russell's office, Pat and Howard sat in the truck in silence. Finally, Howard spoke. He's right, you know. We can't win this straight up. I know. So what do we do? Pat thought about it. Russell had been clear. Legal options were limited. The operators had been careful not to break any laws. And the FBI investigation of Perry meant they'd lost their protection in local law enforcement. But there were other options. Messier options. We go to the Iron Cross, Pat said. Howard's head snapped around. Pat, no. The Iron Cross are psychos. We don't want to involve them. The Iron Cross MC was everything the Savage Kings pretended to be, genuinely dangerous, with connections to serious organized crime. They operated out of Idaho and Wyoming, and the Savage Kings had an uneasy truce with them based on mutual non-interference. We need muscle that these operators won't expect, Pat said. The Iron Cross have people who can make Larson's life complicated without it tracing back to us. And what do we offer them? The Iron Cross don't do favors. We offer them access to our distribution network in Montana. They've been wanting to expand north for years. This gives them the excuse. Howard shook his head. That's dangerous, Pat. We bring in the Iron Cross. We might never get them out. You got a better idea? Howard didn't. That night, Pat made a call to a number he'd sworn he'd never use. The voice that answered was rough, suspicious. Who is this? Pat Caldwell. Savage Kings. I need to talk to Alan. Alan McGrath ran the Iron Cross MC. He was 52, a former enforcer for the Aryan Brotherhood who'd gone independent and built his own criminal empire. Rumors said he'd killed 11 men personally. Pat believed it. What do you want, Caldwell? Pat explained the situation, carefully, without admitting too much. Keith Larson. Military operators. Harassment. Business disruption. McGrath listened in silence. Then, what are you offering? Partnership. Access to our Montana territories. Joint operations. You've been wanting to expand. This is your chance. In exchange for what? Help dealing with Larson. Nothing traceable. Just complications. Make him decide Montana's not worth the trouble. There was a long pause. Then McGrath laughed, a sound like grinding gears. You're asking me to go to war with Delta Force operators so you can keep selling meth to truckers? That's the stupidest thing I've heard all year. These operators can't stay forever. They'll leave, and when they leave, you'll still be weak. And you'll owe me everything. McGrath's voice turned speculative. But I'll tell you what. I'll help you. Not because I like you, but because I don't like federal operators running around the territory like they own it. Sends the wrong message. So I'll send some people to look into Larson. See what pressure points he has. Maybe arrange some distractions. But Caldwell, when this is over, the Savage Kings work for me. Your distribution, your shops, your people, all of it becomes Iron Cross property. You get to keep your patches and your clubhouse, but you're a satellite chapter now. Understood. Pat felt bile rise in his throat. Everything he'd built, everything the club represented, reduced to a puppet organization. But what choice did he have? Understood, Pat said. Good. My people will be in touch. McGrath hung up. Howard had heard enough of the conversation to understand. We just sold our souls. We survived, Pat corrected. That's what matters. But as they drove back to the clubhouse, Pat couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made everything infinitely worse. Keith was reviewing surveillance photos when Mark Castaneda called. We've got a problem. Talk to me. Savage Kings made contact with the Iron Cross MC. Phone intercept confirms Pat Caldwell spoke with Alan McGrath tonight. They're bringing in reinforcements. Keith felt ice settle in his veins. The Iron Cross were different from the Savage Kings. Less pretend, more predator. If they got involved, this situation could turn genuinely dangerous. How many are we talking about? Unknown. But McGrath's organization has over 100 members across Idaho and Wyoming. If he decides this is worth his attention, we could be looking at significant numbers. And their capabilities? Better than the Savage Kings. Some of their members have actual combat experience. Former military, former corrections officers. They also have heavier weapons and fewer scruples about using them. Keith processed this. The plan had been to psychologically dismantle the Savage Kings through pressure and paranoia. But if the Iron Cross entered the equation, that calculus changed. We need to escalate, Keith said. Not violence, but consequences. Make the Savage Kings toxic to work with. If the Iron Cross sees them as a liability rather than an asset. Way ahead of you. Mark's voice carried dark satisfaction. Benjamin's been working on something beautiful. Remember how Lee Hatfield handles the Savage King's finances? Yeah, we've been monitoring his accounts. Turns out Lee's been skimming. Not much, maybe 5% off the top, but enough that if Pat found out, it'd be a death sentence. How do you know he's skimming? Because we checked the records. Lee's got a gambling problem. Online poker, sports betting. He's been stealing from the club to cover his losses. Keith saw where this was going. You want to expose him. Better. We want to make it look like Lee's getting ready to run. We've already transferred $50,000 from club accounts to Lee's personal account. Lee didn't do it. We did, but the digital trail says otherwise. Tomorrow morning, Pat's going to get an anonymous tip that his treasurer is preparing to flip on the entire organization. That'll tear them apart. That's the idea. The Iron Cross won't partner with a club that's falling apart from internal betrayal. They'll back off, let the Savage Kings collapse, and maybe pick up the pieces later. It was ruthless, effective, and would probably get Lee Hatfield killed. Keith thought about that. Hatfield had been there when Sean got beaten, hadn't swung the bat himself, but had participated, holding Sean down, kicking him while he was on the ground. Medical records showed 2 broken ribs. Those had come from Hatfield's boots. Do it, Keith said. But I want eyes on Lee 24/7. If Pat tries to kill him, we intervene. Lee goes to prison, not a grave. Agreed. One more thing. Ian wants to move on Sheriff Perry tonight. The FBI's ready to make their arrest. You want to be there? Keith thought about Everett Perry, a corrupt cop who'd enabled the Savage King's violence, who'd threatened to arrest Keith for protecting his own son. Perry had made himself an obstacle. Where and when? Perry's meeting with Pat tonight at 9. Neutral location, a rest stop on Highway 93. They're going to discuss strategy now that Perry's under investigation. We got the place wired for sound and video. FBI's standing by. I'll be there. At 8:30, Keith drove to a position overlooking the rest stop. From here, he could see the parking lot, the bathrooms, the vending machines. Mark and Joshua were already in position with recording equipment. Benjamin was in a van down the highway, monitoring communications. Pat's truck pulled in at 8:55. Sheriff Perry arrived 3 minutes later in an unmarked car. Through the telephoto lens, Keith watched them meet near the picnic tables. Pat looked agitated. Perry looked scared. Audio's live, Mark said through the earbud. Can't protect you anymore, Perry was saying. The FBI's building a RICO case. They have financial evidence, witness testimony, everything. What kind of testimony? Pat's voice, sharp with paranoia. I don't know specifics, but they mentioned cooperating witnesses. Someone inside your organization is talking. Pat swore viciously. Lee. It's got to be Lee. That gambling-addicted bastard. I need insurance, Perry interrupted. If this goes bad, I need to know the club will take care of my family. Legal fees, living expenses. I've got 30 years on the force. I can't lose everything. How much? 200,000. Cash. Tomorrow. Pat laughed bitterly. You think we just have 200 grand lying around? Our accounts are frozen. Our operations are being watched. Then find a way. Because if I go down, Pat, I'm taking you with me. Every payoff, every protection, every blind eye turned, it's all documented. My insurance policy. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Perry demanding money and Pat trying to negotiate. They incriminated themselves thoroughly, discussing specific crimes, specific payments, specific instances of corruption. Keith watched it all with cold satisfaction. These were the men who'd hurt his son, who'd thought themselves untouchable, who'd built their little kingdom on violence and intimidation. Now, they were just criminals on a recording, sealing their own fates. At 9:30, Perry left. Pat sat at the picnic table for a long moment, head in his hands. Then he made a phone call. Need to talk about Lee, Pat said into his phone. Tomorrow. Early. And bring Howard. This is going to get messy. After Pat drove away, 2 black SUVs rolled into the rest stop. FBI agents, moving with professional precision. They collected the recording equipment, secured the evidence, and disappeared into the night. Mark's voice came through the earbud again. Perry's arrest warrant will be executed at 6 a.m. He's done. And Pat, FBI's building the case. They want to roll up the whole organization, which means they're being patient. But it's coming. Pat Caldwell's time is running out. Keith drove back to the lake house, feeling something unfamiliar. Hope. Not for revenge. That was already in motion. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this could end without more violence. That the law could actually work, could actually deliver justice. But deep down, he knew better. Pat Caldwell wasn't going down quietly, and neither were the Iron Cross. The next morning, Sheriff Everett Perry was arrested at his home by FBI agents. The news spread through Kalispell within hours. Corruption charges, racketeering, conspiracy. 30 years of law enforcement ending in handcuffs and a perp walk. The Savage King's world was imploding. Pat called another emergency meeting at the clubhouse. This time, only the core leadership showed up: Howard, Kenneth, Elmer, and a very nervous Lee Hatfield. "Lee," Pat said quietly, "we need to talk about money." Lee's face went pale. "What about it?" "Specifically, the $50,000 that moved from our operating account to your personal account last night." "Want to explain that?" "I didn't. I have no idea what you're talking about." Lee pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "Let me check my accounts." "Already did. 50,000, wire transfer, executed at 2 a.m. Your login credentials. Your digital signature." "Pat, I swear to God I didn't do that. Someone's setting me up." "Who? Who even has access to those accounts?" "Just you and me." "Unless," Lee's eyes widened, "unless someone hacked them. These military guys, they could have cybersecurity capabilities." Howard slammed his hand on the table. "Enough with the excuses. We've all heard the rumors about your gambling. How much do you owe, Lee?" I'm not in debt. I have it under control." Kenneth stood, cracking his knuckles. "Pat, let me have an hour with him. I'll get the truth." "Sit down, Kenneth." Pat kept his eyes on Lee. "Here's what I think happened. You've been skimming for months. Maybe longer. You've got debts we don't know about. Gambling, drugs, whatever. Now the feds are circling, Perry's arrested, and you're getting ready to run. Maybe cut a deal. That about right?" "No, Pat, we've been brothers for 15 years. Then explain the money." Lee couldn't. He sat there, mouth opening and closing, unable to form a coherent defense against accusations he couldn't prove false. "Here's what's going to happen," Pat said. "You're going to transfer that 50,000 back to the club account. Today, then you're going to submit to a full financial audit. Every account, every transaction, every dollar. If you're clean, you're clean. If you're not." Pat let the threat hang in the air. "And if I refuse, then you're out. Out of the club, out of the protection, out of everything. And Lee, given what you know about our operations, being out isn't a safe place to be." Lee transferred the money within the hour. He had no choice. Refusing would be an admission of guilt. But Pat saw the fear in his eyes, the way his hands shook. Lee knew he was being set up, knew the walls were closing in. "Good." After Lee left, Howard voiced what they were all thinking. He's going to flip. Soon as the feds approach him, he'll trade everything he knows for immunity. Probably, Pat agreed, which is why we need to move our money now. Today. Transfer everything to accounts Lee doesn't have access to, preferably offshore. Can Elmer handle that? Elmer nodded. "I know a guy in the Caymans. Can have new accounts set up by Monday." "Do it. And someone needs to watch Lee. I want to know everyone he talks to, everywhere he goes." Kenneth volunteered. "I'll handle it personally." As the meeting broke up, Pat's phone rang. Alan McGrath, calling from the Iron Cross. "Caldwell, heard your sheriff got arrested." "Yeah, FBI corruption charges. And your treasurer's stealing from you." Pat's blood ran cold. "How did you know about Lee?" "Because I pay attention. Because your organization leaks like a sieve. Because you're falling apart in real time. And I'm reconsidering our arrangement. We can handle this." "No, you can't. You've got federal operators running circles around you. Your local protection is gone, and your own people are turning on each other." McGrath's voice turned hard. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm sending someone to Montana. Name's Julius Riley. Ex-Marine, good with problems. He's going to evaluate your situation and report back to me. If he thinks the Savage Kings can be salvaged, we proceed. If not, I cut you loose and let you drown. When he's already on his way. Should be there by tomorrow." McGrath paused. "And Caldwell? Don't fuck this up. Riley's the only lifeline you're getting." After the call ended, Pat sat alone in the clubhouse, feeling the empire he'd built crumbling around him. Everything was going wrong. Sheriff Perry arrested. Lee under suspicion of theft and cooperation. Federal operators watching their every move. And now the Iron Cross sending an evaluator who could seal their fate with a single negative report. Somewhere out there, Keith Larson was pulling strings, orchestrating this disaster with professional precision. Pat had underestimated him. Badly. Now the question was, could he salvage anything from the wreckage? Or was it already too late? Julius Riley arrived in Kalispell on Saturday morning. He was 45, built like a fire hydrant, with burn scars on his neck and the flat, assessing eyes of a man who'd seen too much violence. Former Marine Force recon, he'd done 3 tours in Iraq before getting dishonorably discharged for reasons he never discussed. The Iron Cross had recruited him for exactly those reasons. Pat met him at a diner outside town, neutral ground. "You must be Caldwell." Riley's handshake was crushing, deliberate. "McGrath sent me to see if you're worth saving. We're having some challenges. You're having a complete organizational collapse. Federal investigation, internal theft, military operators conducting a shadow war against you. I've seen insurgent cells with better operational security." Riley ordered coffee, black. "Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out." Pat talked for 40 minutes. Keith Larson, the attack on Sean, the operators flooding into Montana, the FBI arresting Sheriff Perry. He tried to make it sound manageable, like they just needed temporary support. Riley listened without interrupting. When Pat finished, the Iron Cross enforcer sat back and sipped his coffee. "You're fucked," Riley said simply. "Completely, totally fucked. The only question is whether you're worth salvaging or if McGrath should let you collapse and pick up the territory afterward. We have assets. You have liabilities. Your protection's gone. Your money's being watched, and you have Delta Force operators treating you like a training exercise. Do you even understand what that means? It means Larson brought his friends. It means you're dealing with the most elite fighting force in the world. These men have toppled governments. They've hunted terrorists through mountains and jungles and cities. They've spent their entire adult lives learning how to destroy organizations more sophisticated than yours." Riley leaned forward. "And you attacked one of their kids with a baseball bat. You started a war you can't possibly win. So what do I do?" 3 options. 1. Surrender completely. Apologize, make restitution, beg for mercy. Accept whatever legal consequences come and hope they're satisfied. That's not happening. 2. Go underground. Disband the Savage Kings. Scatter your people. Give up Montana entirely. Start over somewhere else under new identities. Also not happening. 3. Fight back. But not the way you've been fighting. You need to go asymmetric. Find leverage that hurts Larson personally. Make this cost him more than it's worth. Pat felt a flicker of hope. What kind of leverage? His son's at a lake house, right? Guarded but isolated. His ex-wife's still in town, unprotected. These operators have families back home, people they care about. Riley's expression remained neutral, but his implications were clear. You want to end this? Make it personal. Make Larson choose between revenge and protecting the people he loves. Pat felt sick. Targeting Sean again would be suicide. But Amber, I can't hurt my wife. Then you've already lost. Because Larson's willing to hurt everything you've built, and you're handicapping yourself with morality. Riley stood, throwing cash on the table. I'll report back to McGrath that the Savage Kings are a lost cause. When your organization collapses, don't come crying to the Iron Cross. Wait. Pat's mind raced. What if we had a way to neutralize the operators? Force them to leave without targeting civilians? Ow! Their presence in Montana is technically legal, but they're conducting surveillance, hacking communications, interfering with our business. What if we exposed that to the media? Made it a story about military overreach, operators running wild on American soil? Riley considered this. Media coverage could work. Public pressure might force them to back off. But you need proof, recordings, photos, testimony. And you'd need a sympathetic outlet willing to publish it. I know a reporter at the Montana Standard. She hates law enforcement overreach. I give her evidence of Delta operators conducting illegal operations. She'll run with it. Risky. Larson could spin it as justified protection of his son. Let him try. The optics are terrible. Elite soldiers invading a small Montana town, harassing local businessmen, acting like an occupying force. Even if they're technically legal, it looks bad. Riley nodded slowly. That's actually not stupid. Gives McGrath political cover too. He can claim he's protecting Montana from federal overreach. You'd still owe the Iron Cross everything, but at least you'd survive. Then we have a deal. Conditional. You gather the evidence, you leak it to the media, and it actually creates problems for the operators. If that happens, the Iron Cross supports you. If not, you're on your own. After Riley left, Pat felt a grim satisfaction. It wasn't a great plan, but it was something. The Savage Kings had members with cameras, recording equipment. They could document the operator's surveillance, their intimidation tactics, create a narrative of military oppression. And if that narrative caught fire, Keith Larson would have to choose: continue his revenge and face congressional hearings, or back off and let Pat win. Either way, the game was still in play. Keith got the call from Benjamin Sunday evening. They're planning a media campaign. Pat's going to leak evidence of our operations to a reporter, try to create a political firestorm about military overreach. Keith felt his jaw tighten. How solid is the intel? Julius Riley met with Pat yesterday. Our sergeant picked up the whole conversation. Riley's an Iron Cross enforcer, former Marine. He suggested the media strategy after Pat rejected more violent options. Options involving Sean and Amber? Yeah, to his credit, Pat shut that down hard. Said he wouldn't target his wife. Keith felt a flicker of, not respect, exactly, but recognition. Pat Caldwell was a criminal, but he had lines he wouldn't cross. That was something. What's our exposure if they go public? Technically minimal. Everything we've done has been legal: surveillance in public spaces, monitoring communications with proper authorization, coordinating with federal law enforcement. But optics-wise, it looks bad. Elite soldiers harassing civilians in a small town. Congress would demand explanations, media would run with the story, and the Pentagon would have to respond. Keith thought about that. A media firestorm could end the operation. Force them to pull back, return to deployment. Leave Pat and the Savage Kings intact. That wasn't acceptable. We need to get ahead of this, Keith said. Control the narrative before they can. How? By making sure the full story comes out. Not just operators harassing bikers, but father protects son from violent criminals. We need Sean's medical records public. The security footage of the attack. Pat's criminal history. Make this about what actually happened. You want to go public first? I want to make it impossible for Pat to claim victim status. He gets sympathy when people think he's being oppressed by the military. He doesn't get sympathy when people see video of his friends beating a teenager with a baseball bat. Mark Castaneda's voice joined the call. I like it, but we need a platform. Someone credible who will present the facts fairly. I know someone, Keith said. Kathleen Wilson, an investigative journalist he'd met years ago during a human interest piece on military families. She'd stayed in touch, had always been fair in her reporting. Let me make a call. Kathleen Wilson answered on the third ring, her voice professionally curious. Keith Larson, I haven't heard from you in 5 years. This must be interesting. I have a story for you. National interest involves military veterans, biker gangs, and a 17-year-old kid with a fractured skull. You interested? There was a pause. I'm listening. Keith laid it out. Everything. Sean's beating, the medical evidence, Pat's criminal background, the Savage King's drug operations. He sent her the security footage, the medical records, the FBI files that Benjamin had acquired through carefully cultivated sources. This is explosive, Kathleen said after reviewing the materials. But Keith, I need to ask, what's your involvement beyond being the father? Because I'm hearing rumors about Delta operators in Montana. I'm on emergency leave to protect my son. Some of my teammates decided to take their R&R in Montana at the same time. We haven't broken any laws. But you're conducting surveillance? We're observing. In public. With the knowledge and cooperation of federal law enforcement who are investigating the Savage King's criminal activities. Everything we've done is legal. And your goal? Justice. The Savage Kings put my son in the hospital and faced no consequences. Sheriff Perry protected them. The local system failed. So yes, I brought resources to bear. I made sure the FBI investigation moved forward, made sure evidence was documented, made sure these criminals understood they're not untouchable. Kathleen was quiet for a long moment. This is a huge story, Keith. But if I run it, there will be blowback. The Savage Kings will come after me, politically if not physically, which is why you publish everything at once. The evidence is overwhelming. By the time they can mount a counter-narrative, the truth is already out there. When do you want this published? Tomorrow, before Pat can leak his version. That's fast. I'll need to verify everything, get statements, build the story properly. You have 12 hours. After that, Pat's version hits first and the narrative gets muddied. Kathleen swore softly. You're asking me to bet my career on one day of reporting. I'm asking you to tell the truth about what happened to my son. You see the evidence. You know it's solid. The question is whether you're willing to stand behind it. Another pause. Then, send me everything you have. Every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. I'll work through the night. If it checks out, and I mean completely checks out, I'll publish tomorrow morning. Keith sent everything. The full package, medical records, security footage, FBI reports, Pat's criminal history, the Savage Kings organizational structure. Hundreds of pages of documentation that painted a clear picture of violent criminals operating with impunity. Kathleen worked through the night, calling sources, verifying facts, building an airtight story. At 6 a.m. Monday morning, her article went live on the Montana Standard's website, then got picked up by the Associated Press. Delta operator's son hospitalized after biker gang attack. Military father brings resources to bear against organized crime in Montana. The story had everything. The security footage showing Sean's beating, medical documentation of his injuries, Pat's extensive criminal record, the FBI's ongoing investigation of the Savage Kings, and Sheriff Perry's arrest. It presented Keith not as a vigilante, but as a father using legal means to protect his son after local authorities failed. By noon, it was national news. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, every major outlet running the footage, interviewing legal experts, debating whether Keith's response was justified. The consensus, yes. Public opinion swung massively in Keith's favor. Veterans groups rallied to support him. Parent organizations praised his dedication. Law enforcement analysts pointed out that he'd done everything through legal channels, working with federal investigators, gathering evidence, using surveillance rather than violence. The Savage Kings, meanwhile, were eviscerated in the court of public opinion. The footage of 5 grown men beating a teenager was damning. Pat's criminal history made him unsympathetic. The FBI investigation gave the story federal weight. By Tuesday morning, Montana's governor was calling for a full investigation of the Savage Kings. The U.S. Attorney for Montana announced expanded RICO charges. 3 Savage Kings members turned themselves in on outstanding warrants, unwilling to risk harboring charges. The media campaign Pat had planned died before it could launch. Nobody cared about military overreach when the context was father protecting son from violent criminals. Julius Riley called Pat Tuesday afternoon. You're done, Riley said without preamble. McGrath's pulling the plug. The Iron Cross wants nothing to do with your organization. You're radioactive. We can still. You can't. Your entire operation is compromised. Your leadership is facing federal charges, and you've lost the PR war so badly that sympathizing with you would be political suicide for anyone involved. Riley's voice carried grim satisfaction. McGrath says to tell you that he appreciates the territory opportunity, but he'll wait until after your organization collapses completely before moving in. Saves him the trouble of negotiating. The call disconnected. Pat sat in the clubhouse, surrounded by increasingly panicked members. Howard looked shell-shocked. Kenneth was drinking straight from a whiskey bottle. Lee had disappeared entirely, probably working on a deal with federal prosecutors. What do we do? Howard asked. Pat had no answer. Everything was gone. Their protection, their reputation, their future. Federal charges were coming. RICO meant serious prison time. The club was finished. We lawyer up, Pat said finally. Talk to Jerome. See what kind of deals we can make. Maybe if we cooperate, give up the drug suppliers, we can avoid life sentences. That's it. We just surrender. What else is there? We're beaten, Howard. Completely, totally beaten. Larson won. And in that moment, Pat Caldwell understood what Keith Larson had known from the beginning. There were levels to violence, to power, to capability. The Savage Kings had operated for decades, believing themselves dangerous. But they'd never faced real danger. Now they had, and it had destroyed them without firing a single shot. The federal arrests came on Thursday morning. FBI agents, ATF agents, DEA agents, a coordinated sweep that netted 18 Savage Kings members on various charges. Pat Caldwell, Howard Pearson, Kenneth Dodson, Elmer Schwartz, all taken into custody. Lee Hatfield had already cut a deal, trading testimony for immunity. He'd laid out the entire criminal organization: drug suppliers, money laundering schemes, protection rackets. The evidence was overwhelming. Keith watched the arrest from the lake house, Sean beside him on the deck. His son's bruises had faded to yellow, his ribs were healing, and he put back on most of the weight he'd lost. The physical recovery was nearly complete. "It's really over?" Sean asked. "The criminal case? That's just beginning. But yeah, the danger's over. Pat and his friends are going to prison for a long time." "What about Mom?" "That was complicated." Amber had called Keith twice in the last week, sobbing apologies. She'd seen the security footage, finally believed what had happened. She was filing for divorce from Pat, moving back in with Janelle, trying to rebuild her life. "Your mom made mistakes," Keith said carefully. "She chose to believe someone she shouldn't have trusted. But she's trying to make it right now. Do you forgive her?" "I'm working on it. For your sake more than hers." Keith put his arm around his son's shoulders. "What matters is that you're safe. That's all I ever wanted." Ian McFadden emerged from the house, carrying 2 beers. He handed one to Keith, kept one for himself. "The squadron's heading back to base tomorrow," McFadden said. "Deployment schedules wait for no one. You staying in Montana?" "For a while. Sean's finishing his senior year here, staying with Janelle. I've got another month of leave. Figured I'd stick around, make sure everything settles." And after that, Keith considered his future. 12 years with Delta. How many more did he have? How much more could he sacrifice for the mission before there was nothing left of him to give? "I don't know," Keith admitted. "Maybe it's time to reassess priorities. Make sure I'm there for the moments that matter." McFadden nodded. "You earned that choice. But Keith, the squadron will always be there for you. What we did here, that's what brothers do. You protected us for 12 years. We protected your son for 2 weeks. I'd call that a fair trade." After McFadden left, Keith and Sean sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Flathead Lake. "Dad," Sean's voice was quiet. "Thank you for coming home, for everything. You never have to thank me for that. You're my son. I'll always come home for you." 3 months later, Keith stood in a federal courtroom in Missoula, watching Pat Caldwell receive his sentence. 23 years for racketeering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy. Howard Pearson got 18 years. Kenneth Dodson got 15. The Savage Kings Motorcycle Club was officially dissolved, its assets seized, its members scattered. Sheriff Everett Perry had already been sentenced to 12 years for corruption. The judge asked if Keith wanted to make a victim impact statement. He declined. The evidence spoke for itself. Outside the courthouse, Kathleen Wilson was waiting with a camera crew. "Keith Larson, you've become a symbol for parental advocacy and standing up to criminal organizations. What's next for you?" Keith smiled. "I'm retiring from active duty, taking a teaching position at the Army Ranger School, spending more time with my son, living a quieter life. Any advice for parents facing similar situations? Document everything. Work within the legal system. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And remember, justice might be slow, but it's real. The people who hurt your children can't hide forever." The interview ran that night on national news. Keith Larson, the Delta operator who'd brought down a biker gang to protect his son, was now advocating for legal solutions to violent crime. It was a good story, a clean ending. But Keith knew the truth was messy. The psychological warfare, the surveillance, the pressure campaign, none of that had been entirely legal. They'd bent rules, exploited connections, used capabilities that weren't meant for domestic operations. But his son was safe. The bad guys were in prison. And sometimes that was enough. 6 months after the arrests, Keith attended Sean's high school graduation. Amber was there too, sober and clear-eyed, rebuilt from the wreckage of her choices. They weren't together, would never be together again, but they could be civil for their son's sake. As Sean walked across the stage to receive his diploma, Keith felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the temporary peace between deployments, but genuine, lasting peace. His son was whole. The monsters were caged. The mission was complete. And for a Delta operator who'd spent 12 years fighting wars in distant countries, that was the greatest victory of all. Keith Larson's story became a case study in military ethics classes, legal seminars, and law enforcement training. How a father had used legal tools, public pressure, and strategic thinking to dismantle a criminal organization without breaking the law himself. Most of the story, anyway. The classified parts, the NSA surveillance, the financial manipulation, the psychological warfare, those stayed buried. Only the 62 Delta operators who'd been there knew the full truth. And they'd never tell. Because that's what brothers did. They protected each other's secrets, honored each other's sacrifices, and made sure that when evil came for one of their own, it faced the full weight of their collective strength. The Savage Kings had learned that lesson too late, and they'd paid for it with everything they had.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.